from various parts of the country, I mean, various parts of the world, actually, how people are facing the circumstances that actually what is happening around the world. Because it's like, a devastating factor that it's all of a sudden that this happened. So actually, I wanted to know from various parts of the world and from everyone that actually what the fact is going on. So first of all, Danny, I would like to ask you that in your particular country, what is the present situation and what is actually happening?
Yeah, well, the US got the virus a little bit later than China and Italy and some parts of Europe.
Hmm.
But we've been dealing with it for the last like 2 weeks or so in high fashion. And before that, people were aware of it, but people weren't really paying attention to it. Over the last like week or so, most, actually, I believe all schools in the country have shut down and gone online. And many cities, states, and localities are putting together restrictions saying you can only leave your house if you are an essential worker, someone like maybe news media or a store owner who's selling like essential supplies. But if you're anyone else, you're supposed to stay in your home, period. That's the case in LA, it's the case in New York, it's the case in Seattle, Washington, quite a few of the cities and states in America. Not all of America has done that yet. There's also criticisms in the US because there aren't enough test kits to be able to find out who actually has the virus. So if there were enough test kits, you could simply test everyone who is suspected of having it. And the ones who do have it, you could quarantine them. And then you can stop the spread of the virus. But since we don't have enough test kits, you can't actually do that. So they're shooting blind. Nobody knows who actually has the virus. And since you can have the virus and be contagious without having any symptoms, there's really no way of preventing the spread of it. So even though a lot of cities and states are keeping people inside, it's very likely that the virus is going to continue to spread and infect a lot of the country.
Okay. So till date, as your knowledge, as you are concerned, I just want to know that what is the viewpoint regarding China? Because it's obviously in the news, or obviously it is there in many of the articles that that is a particular nation that had kept hidden many of the facts concerned related to this particular virus. If before time, like as we know that maybe it was the only it was maybe that the Chinese government or their particular administration wanted to create a bio war or wanted to have a bio war with other nations, and so they were. I'm just saying it's a
Right, right.
possibility. They may or they have might have created the virus by themselves. So I want to know from you actually what is your viewpoint regarding that. How will you I mean say about or what is your perception regarding Chinese government on this particular issue?
Well, I don't think that either the government or the state's government was responsible for creating this as some sort of bioweapon or anything like that. But I do agree that the Chinese government in particular, and then once it got to America, the US government as well, have not been effective at dealing with the initial spread of the virus. Actually, it's funny because in both countries, after the first couple of weeks, the response became quite good. Like China, for the first few months, did not do enough. They suppressed the whistleblowers.
Yeah.
They did not take responsibility for what was going on, which allowed it to get out of Wuhan, which allowed it to eventually go around the world. And that was incredibly irresponsible, and they should be held accountable for that. The United States essentially did the same thing. Once it got to the United States, there was sort of just this mindset that it wasn't that big of a deal. Trump was telling people, oh, it's nothing, it's already under control, but it wasn't. And so now the spread that we're currently seeing is also attributable to the way the government responded.
Okay. Uh, you say me one thing that I just want to know one particular fact that at the present stage, when this virus is spreading all over the world, and when there is no other medicines or there is no other treatment, rather than self quarantine or self isolation, in UK they have applied herd immunity. So, what is the perception regarding that? do you think that herd immunity will work? That means which is completely opposite to what we countries or what the nations of India are trying to do.
So the UK actually, as of the last couple of days, already is pushing, like leaving behind that concept. They thought that was going to work, but then they got a bunch of cases. And part of the reason why so many countries are instituting social distancing or mandatory government quarantine, whatever it might be, is because there is a logical perception that we can take it, we'll deal with it, we'll be fine. But logic is always overridden by emotion and fear and panic. And people all around the world are incredibly scared. Whether they should be or not, they are. And since that emotion is taking over right now, there are no countries that can actually just ignore it, that can just institute herd immunity. Because as soon as they start to see people around them getting sick, the panic starts to rise, and then they demand action, which is what's happening in the UK. That's what basically has happened in every country. Italy started out, oh, it's no big deal, we don't need to worry about it. Now they're under lockdown. The US, oh, it's no big deal, we don't have to worry about it. Now most of the US is under lockdown. The UK, we're going to use herd immunity. Now they're already starting to implement measures to try and deal with it.
Okay. I mean, if self quarantine is the only treatment that we people can have, do you think it will be effective in the long run? Because I don't think so that people can isolate themselves from the world for many of the weeks, because there are many people who have to go for outside works because they have their own activities to perform. Do you think self isolation is the only solution to this?
Um, I think that there are two solutions. Neither of them are good. One of them is the self-isolation and or government quarantine. That works in a country like China. China, because they have such a strong central government, you can like or dislike that they have such a strong central government, but they do have it. And since they had that, they were able to use that power to enforce mandatory quarantines, which did actually prevent the virus from spreading. There are very few countries in the world, though, that have that sort of power. So there are very few countries that can actually enforce a mandatory quarantine without potential riots, civil war, etc. And that's part of what you're seeing, like with Italy. They are now trying to keep people under quarantine, but they simply don't have the same power that China did with their populace. So you're kind of left with two options. You can either do nothing, or at least with regards to stopping people from dealing, you can recommend that they not go out around other people, but you can't enforce that. Or you enforce it with strict governmental penalties. Neither option is particularly good, though, because it's a catch-22. The only countries that can successfully enforce it are the ones with a huge central government, and the countries who don't have that are basically just going to have to deal with the fact that a lot of people are going to get sick and die.
Okay. I just got connected with Seth. Can you hear me, Seth? Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Seth, can you hear me?
Hello? Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
How are you?
I'm good.
Okay. So let us start. What is your perception regarding this current COVID-19? What do you want to say actually?
It's pretty new, and I think a lot of doctors are like freaking out about it because like we got to find a medication to like combat it or a vaccine or something like that.
Okay.
That's
So
pretty much all I got. That's all I got.
okay. So in your area, is there any patients who have got all this particular disease in your area? I mean, in your nearby surroundings.
Yeah, I mean there was a lot in Italy recently, but I think we've had some in America. Like everything's in our country, like everything's on lockdown. So schools, restaurants, uh, karaoke bars, everything. It's being shut down.
Okay. Okay.
People
The
are
same
freaking
question
out.
I'd
It's
like
really
to ask you. What is your perception regarding this UK's policy, herd immunity system? What do you want to say? Do you think it was something that it was something good for the nation, or it had a devastating effect?
I don't really know too much about that.
Okay. Okay, fine. Do you think this self-quarantine or self-isolation would be the only treatment to this particular disease? Or do you think there are any other alternatives to that?
Just figure out what's causing it, who has it, and how to prevent it, pretty much. Because I think a lot of people are freaking out right now. But like I said earlier, doctors especially are just in a panic.
Well,
It's like, what are you going to do?
what do you want to say about Chinese government? Do you think they have taken all the precautionary steps they should have taken? I mean, at the initial stage, don't you think they showed a bit negligence towards this particular virus when it initially occurred in the state?
Yeah, I think like they may have had like some knowledge about it before it spread.
Fine. So, do you think that it will someday or the other affect the diplomacy that has occurred among the nations with China, India, or China, America? Do you think the diplomacies would be some way affected on because of this?
Maybe you just have to see how it goes. I don't really have too much to say about it, but I kind of wanted to hear your thoughts and Daniel's thoughts on it some more.
So, I would just like to ask Daniel, do you think the diplomacies would be affected?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think it already has been to a certain extent, because the U.S. has started saying it's a Chinese virus, and China has been telling their civilians that it is a virus that was spread because of the U.S. military operation that was in China. And once the U.S. pushed back on that, China said, all right, well, we are going to expel. And so they've expelled, I believe, Washington Post, New York Times, and one other news organization from the U.S. They've expelled journalists from China who were reporting the U.S. side of the story. Which side is correct, China or the U.S.? I don't think we can officially say yet, although I do tend to lean toward the U.S.'s explanation because there are independent sources who also verify that this came from animals in China, not from military personnel from the U.S.
Akashdeep, do you want to ask any questions to both of our friends from Canada and New York? Akashdeep, can you hear me? Akashdeep, can you hear
Can
me?
you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, I just want to ask Daniel. So, what are the precautionary measures that can be taken? What do you think the precautionary measures, just in short? Like, see, we are in stage two. India is in stage two of this virus, and so what can we do to save ourselves? For basic measures. What do you think?
Well, the precautionary measures are try to avoid groups of people. Do try to avoid where there are a lot of sicknesses, and wash your hands and try to be safe. If you get it, it's probably not going to be that dangerous for you. If you get it or if you're feeling sick, then certainly the most important thing, in my opinion, and as far as like most of the experts who I've read, do not bring yourself in contact with someone who is elderly because they're the ones who are at most at risk from this virus.
Yeah,